Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
David had the habit of coming home from work always at the same time. He rarely arrived late, and even with the intense routine at the investment office, he maintained an almost meticulous care for the commitments in his personal life. He believed that stability at home was the foundation of everything, and Rachel made sure to reciprocate that effort. Married for 7 years, they shared their days with respect, affection, and a certain predictability that many envied. She took care of the house with dedication and lightness. She had a serene way about her that calmed David's turbulent days. And then there was Rachel's beauty, natural, elegant, discreet. Wherever she went, eyes followed, though she rarely noticed. For David, it was never a problem. He trusted her completely and knew that Rachel's glow didn't come just from her appearance but from the way she treated the people around her. When he received the invitation to the reception organized by his boss, Mr. Hamilton, David hesitated for a moment. He wasn't the type to attend company parties, preferring more intimate events. But the invitation was direct, personal, and part of an important celebration, the positive results of the quarter. It showed recognition for the team's effort, and for Hamilton, it was also a way to integrate families into the behind-the-scenes of the business. The invitation stated that employees could bring their spouses. David mentioned it to Rachel during dinner, and without much thought, she said she would love to accompany him. It was a good chance to get to know his colleagues better, and maybe breathe some fresh air. On the night of the party, Rachel wore a simple outfit that highlighted her charm in an elegant way. When they arrived at Mr. Hamilton's mansion, David naturally guided her through groups of guests, introducing colleagues, sharing workplace stories, and discreetly praising the role she played in his life. People greeted her with smiles, impressed by her gentle demeanor. Everything seemed to be going as expected until Rachel noticed a persistent gaze coming from a young man near the bar. He looked bored, holding a glass of juice and talking to 2 friends. From a distance, Rachel thought he was just another casual guest, someone from the finance department like the others. But after a few uncomfortable exchanges of glances, she realized he was watching her more intensely than anyone else there. Brandon, the host's son, was only 19 years old but already carried an arrogant and overly confident attitude for his age. When David stepped away to greet an executive from the company, Brandon approached. With a provocative smile and a slow drawl, he commented something about how certain presences lit up the room, looking directly at her. Rachel just smiled politely and walked away. She tried to pretend she hadn't heard, but Brandon repeated the comment, this time a little louder, calling her a rare vision among so many gray suits. She turned to him, firmly responding that she was there accompanying her husband and preferred to be treated with respect. He just shrugged and laughed as if it were all a joke. When David returned, Brandon had already walked away, moving with the same careless and confident attitude. Rachel tried to continue the evening normally, disguising her discomfort, though her mind began spinning with questions she couldn't yet organize. At one point, Mr. Hamilton approached the couple to thank them for coming. He was a respected man with many years in the market, always polite and courteous. He said he was happy that David had brought his wife and called her a woman of class, a phrase that made her feel even more uncomfortable given Brandon's earlier behavior. His words were kind, but unintentionally triggered an internal alarm in her. Inside, Rachel hoped that compliment was just a gesture of courtesy. She tried not to show the unease that was slowly growing inside her, but she felt that something had been broken during that brief encounter with the young man. The night went on, and Rachel stayed close to David as much as she could. When she needed to go to the restroom, she took a deep breath before crossing the room. She came back as quickly as possible. She avoided eye contact with Brandon until the end of the party. When they got into the car to leave, David asked if she had enjoyed the evening. Rachel forced a smile and said yes. It was easier to keep it to herself than to create discomfort without proof, without consequences, without clarity. What she didn't imagine was that her silence would come at a high cost. What seemed like an isolated incident was about to become something much bigger, much more dangerous, and completely out of control. Rachel woke up early the next day, still feeling the discomfort lodged in her chest. She had tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, that what happened at the party had been just a misunderstanding. But something inside her kept signaling that this story wasn't over. She prepared breakfast as usual, washed the dishes, replied to some messages on her phone, and continued with her routine. At one point, while updating her social media, a notification appeared. A friend request from a profile named Brandon H. The same face she had tried to forget from the previous night now popped up on the screen with a mocking smile in the photo. Her heart raced for a moment. She took a deep breath and declined the request immediately. She tried to move on with her day as if it were irrelevant, but she couldn't. A few hours later, another notification. This time, a direct message. It was him. Even with the blocked profile, Brandon had created another one. The message started with forced compliments, comments about the outfit she wore at the party, and praise for her smile. The tone was strange, somewhere between seductive and intrusive. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She blocked him again. But the next day, the cycle repeated. A new profile, new messages. Only this time, there was a change. Brandon wasn't flirting anymore. Now he was threatening. He said that if she told anyone anything to David, he would convince his father to fire him from the company. He used phrases like, "No one would believe you," and "Don't forget who's in charge here." Rachel read and reread it, feeling a mix of anger, shame, and fear. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She knew she hadn't given him any opening or created any ambiguous situation. But still, fear took over. What if Brandon followed through on his threat? What if her husband was harmed because of something she couldn't even control? She tried to convince herself that this would pass. That it was just a phase. That he would get tired and stop. But that's not what happened. Rachel tried to keep living within her routine, as if the night of the party had been just an uncomfortable and fleeting episode. A few days passed, and despite a lingering discomfort in her chest, she thought everything was resolved. She didn't mention anything to David. She chose to preserve the peace of their marriage. On Friday morning, she went to the grocery store, as she did every week. She walked between the aisles with her shopping list in hand, picking out fruits and other basic items. When she turned down the dairy aisle, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Rachel?" She slowly turned her face. Brandon was there. Wearing sporty clothes, his hair styled as if it had been arranged minutes before. He was smiling, trying to look casual. "What a nice coincidence. I never imagined running into you here. Do you live nearby?" Rachel kept her composure. "Yes. I'm in a hurry, I have things to take care of." "Good morning, Brandon." He moved a little closer, as if he hadn't heard her hint. "You look even more beautiful outside of that party. It's impressive." Rachel took a step back. She looked around, noticing that the market was relatively empty. She tried to maintain a firm tone and an upright posture. "Please, Brandon. This isn't a game. Not the other day, not now. I'm married. And I'm asking you, respect me." For a moment, he fell silent. His previously light expression turned more serious. Then, in a low but full of conviction voice, he let out the words that changed everything. "You will be mine. I want you for myself. Get ready." He said it looking directly into her eyes, with a cold smile. Then he turned around and walked away with calm steps, as if he had just sealed a fate. Rachel stood frozen, feeling her heart race as if she had run a marathon. The bag in her hand trembled. The fruits fell to the ground, but she didn't even notice. She only snapped back when an employee asked if everything was okay. She nodded, but inside, a wave of fear was forming. The next day, one of Rachel's friends invited her for a walk in the park. It was meant to be a light outing, to walk, talk, and grab a coffee. She almost declined but accepted to try to clear her head. They were sitting on a bench, laughing about old stories, when a luxury car parked nearby. Brandon got out, wearing sunglasses, and walked toward them as if he were part of that group. Rachel froze for a moment. Her friends found it odd but smiled, thinking he might be some distant acquaintance. "Good morning, ladies," he said in a polite, almost theatrical tone. "Rachel, what a pleasant surprise to see you again." She remained silent. Her friends responded politely, and Brandon took the opportunity to make his next move. He looked at her with a more restrained smile, as if making a trivial invitation. "Want to grab a coffee with me? I know a great place nearby." Her friends exchanged surprised looks, waiting for a response. Rachel stood up firmly. "This is ridiculous. Please, leave." He just smiled, pretending it was part of a joke. He said, "See you around," and left with the same calmness with which he arrived. Her friends asked if she knew him. Rachel, embarrassed and uncomfortable, simply replied that he was a distant acquaintance from her husband's company and that she had no idea why he was acting that way. She tried to change the subject, but her smile no longer had the same lightness. That feeling she had at the market had returned. Only now it was stronger. Because Brandon no longer seemed like just an inconvenience. He was someone who had crossed a dangerous line, and seemed determined to go further. Rachel arrived home that day unable to hide it. Not even from herself. The tension no longer fit in her body. The encounter at the market, the refused coffee in the park, the persistent stares, the threatening tone, the abuse disguised as charm, all of it was growing like an open wound. She closed the door, dropped her bag on the couch, and stood there, trying to organize her thoughts. Her world, until recently, revolved around safe routines and simple choices. Now, every step outside the house felt like a risk, every outing an exposure. It was as if her life had been invaded by someone who thought he owned everything, even her silence. David arrived home earlier than usual that day. He found it odd to see his wife standing still, arms crossed, staring at the floor. He didn't ask right away. He just observed her for a few seconds and said he would take a shower. When he came out of the bedroom, he found Rachel sitting, holding her phone. Her eyes were red, like someone trying to hold on to something for too long. She looked at him and said she needed to talk. She didn't ask permission, nor wait for the right moment. She was tired of protecting someone who never needed protection. She opened her gallery, showed him the messages she had received over the past weeks, the screenshots of fake profiles, the records of threats. Then she told him about the day at the market, the scene in the park, the constant discomfort she felt even at home. David listened to everything in silence. He scrolled through the images, read each line carefully, as if trying to find some logic in the absurdity. When he finished, he placed the phone on the table and stared at his own hands. His silence weighed more than any words. Then he said, firmly, that nothing justified that. That he never imagined she was facing something so serious alone. That no job was worth the dignity of the woman he loved. And that the next day, he would resolve the situation. The next morning, David put on the same shirt he wore on important meeting days. He left earlier than usual and arrived at the company headquarters before the other employees. He asked to speak with Mr. Hamilton. The boss promptly welcomed him, thinking it would be another conversation about performance or projections for the next quarter. When David entered the room, he locked the door. He took his phone out of his pocket, unlocked the screen, and calmly handed it to the boss. Hamilton looked at it with some confusion. As he started reading, his expression changed. The light tone disappeared from his face. As he scrolled through the messages, his features became increasingly tense. David didn't raise his voice. He said he understood the respect everyone had for the Hamilton family, but that even with everything he had built there, he refused to work in a place where his wife was being threatened by the owner's own son. He said he preferred to leave with his head held high rather than stay silent and condone such behavior. His resignation wasn't delivered with paper or a speech. It was a simple, direct decision based on principles. The boss, visibly shaken, asked him to sit down. He asked several questions to understand the context, but David didn't go into details. The messages spoke for themselves. The silence that followed was long. After a few minutes, Hamilton handed the phone back and said only that he felt ashamed by what he had read. He said that as a father, he was ashamed. As a leader, even more so. He stood up, walked to the window, and stood there for a few moments looking outside. Then he turned and said he wouldn't accept the resignation. On the contrary. David's stance only showed the kind of man he was. Someone who chose what was right even when it came at a high cost. And people like that were rare. He said that Brandon would face consequences and that he personally would handle it. And at that moment, he promoted David. A higher position, more autonomy, a direct acknowledgement of the courage he showed in placing the truth above convenience. A few hours later, Hamilton called his son. The tone was different. He ordered him to come to the company headquarters. When Brandon arrived, with that same confident air, he found his father standing alongside David. The boss didn't yell, didn't make a scene. He showed the messages, reminded him of the encounters, and questioned his behavior. Brandon tried to justify himself, saying everything had been misinterpreted, that Rachel was exaggerating. But Hamilton interrupted with a single sentence: "You crossed a line and have no idea of the damage you've caused." The son crossed his arms, tried to smirk, but realized no one there found it amusing. Then, without beating around the bush, the father cut off his allowance, took away his car keys, and demanded that he write a formal apology letter to Rachel. David left the room with the relief of someone who had done the right thing, even without knowing what would come next. He knew this story could still bring bitter chapters. But at that moment, at least, he felt he had regained control. And Rachel would finally know that her silence wasn't hers alone anymore. Rachel spent the following days feeling more relieved. Talking to David had reignited something inside her that had seemed extinguished for weeks. Finally, she felt she didn't have to carry that fear by herself. She knew her husband would take the necessary steps, and the fact that he didn't hesitate, didn't ask for explanations, but reacted with firmness and calmness, made her start breathing more easily again. Still, she preferred to remain cautious. She kept the doors always locked, avoided going out alone, and monitored her surroundings with her eyes always alert. The experience of being followed, watched, and provoked in public by someone who acted with such freedom had left marks that wouldn't disappear overnight. On an ordinary afternoon, while folding some clothes in the bedroom, Rachel heard the doorbell ring. She looked at the clock. David was still at work, and no neighbor usually stopped by unannounced. She walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Brandon was there. Standing, wearing a dark t-shirt, with his hands in his pockets. Rachel immediately stepped back. She grabbed the phone and called David. Her voice was steady but tense. She explained what was happening, and David simply responded that he was on his way. Then David called Mr. Hamilton and informed him about his son's latest appearance. Brandon rang the doorbell again. Then he knocked with the back of his hand, as if in a hurry. Rachel didn't say anything. She remained silent on the other side of the door, just observing. He approached the peephole, almost pressing his face against it, as if he could see her through the lens. In a loud voice, he said he just wanted to talk, that she was being unfair, that it was all a misunderstanding. Rachel stayed still, holding the phone and keeping her gaze fixed. He took a few steps back, looked around, kicked a pebble on the ground, then started pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, as if thinking about what to say or waiting for a response that would never come. Brandon took 2 steps forward and began pounding on the door with his fists, hitting the wood insistently, as if trying to break Rachel's resistance with his yelling. His voice echoed through the entrance of the house, loud, tense, filled with forced urgency. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "Rachel, open this door. We need to settle this. You're confusing things. It can't end like this," he kept insisting, each knock more aggressive, pressing, trying to force a response. Inside, Rachel held the phone with trembling hands, but her feet stayed firmly planted. She heard everything, every word, every impact on the wood, but she didn't move. She had already given in to fear too much. A few minutes later, a black car pulled up in front of the house. David got out, accompanied by 2 security guards from the company and Mr. Hamilton himself. Brandon noticed the commotion and stopped where he was. David didn't approach him and instead rushed inside to stand by his wife, staying on the inside, looking out the window. It was the father who addressed the young man. He didn't shout, didn't scream. He simply said, "Get in the car." Brandon hesitated for 2 seconds but obeyed. He knew he had crossed a line and that he wouldn't get away with excuses anymore. The silence was the clearest sign that there was no more room for apologies. Mr. Hamilton didn't look back either. He got into the car with his son and drove off without saying where they were headed. The next morning, David received a message from his boss saying that Brandon had been enrolled in a strict military school, out of state. The kind of institution where discipline was the only language. Where there was no luxury of a mansion, imported cars, or influential last names. The decision had been made quickly and definitively. Mr. Hamilton made it clear that this was a way to make his son understand, in practice, the meaning of responsibility. He needed boundaries he had never had, and he needed to learn that money and power aren't shields for cowardly actions. With Brandon out of the picture, Rachel began living with more peace of mind. It took some time for her to feel completely safe again, but with each passing day, she reclaimed parts of herself that she had lost. She returned to walking in the park with her friends, doing her shopping the way she liked, living without constantly looking over her shoulder. David, now in a higher position, managed his schedule better, spent more time with her, and made a point of reminding her, through small gestures, that he was present. What could have destroyed their marriage, what could have caused fear, separation, deep trauma, ended up strengthening them both. The truth is that Rachel's courage to speak, even if belatedly, and David's decision to act with dignity and firmness in the face of the threat, saved not only their relationship but also the very identity of each of them. Many men would have doubted their wives. Many would have stayed silent to protect their jobs. Many would have exposed the story in a shameful way. But David chose the path of truth. And Rachel found the strength to no longer stay silent. In the end, what remained was respect. It was partnership. It was the certainty that the value of a marriage doesn't lie in appearances but in how each person reacts when the other needs them. They continued their lives with their heads held high. Not because everything was easy, but because they chose what was right when everything pushed them toward the more comfortable option. And for those who watched it all from afar, a clear message remained: sometimes, true power lies in simply saying enough. In not accepting the unacceptable. And, most importantly, in protecting the ones you love, even if it costs you everything you've built. Because in the end, what really matters is the peace of being able to sleep next to someone you respect, and who respects you in return. Without fear. Without silence. Without owing your conscience anything. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.